Very good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Friday Drinks. We started early on and we went in, I think we were 10 minutes in, and unfortunately there was a technical glitch, so we had to start all over again. We can't exactly remember what we said, but I think we were making fun of Chris attire. But before we do that, welcome, Chris. Welcome to Friday Drinks.
No, pleasure.
You are a friend of Friday Drinks, so we are always grateful to have your presence here.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. And you came wearing this, African attire, Nigerian, West
African attire.
African attire.
Yes.
Would you like to get into just the details again on why you're wearing the African attire?
Because I'm an African. I think that's the first thing. We need to be clear about that. I know most of the time when I wear anything close to Western, like from UK, from US, no one will care to talk about it. But in coming closer home from the Western to West Africa, I think possibly it's patriotism taking a pitch in how I approach my dress code also. But thank you for the compliments.
Okay.
Yeah, you're looking dapper. It suits you, this Western attire.
No, thank you so much.
And when
although
did
it's calling it a funny hat, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. But when did you have this epiphany that this is how you're going to dress?
No, for the past 3-4 years, I think this has been part of my style. For those who knows me well, I think I tried to build this also to the market, the fashion market of Zim, to accept that maybe, look, when you talk of choices of attire, we can't be limited to what we consider to be the colonial garb or attire. We're moving beyond that.
Okay.
I guess you're
Very Pan-African.
Thank you so much.
Okay, today we are sponsored. One of our viewers has kindly provided this sponsorship. That's what we're going to have, liquid fruit, clear apple. And this side of the aisle are the teetotalers. And let's hear what the alcoholics are actually drinking.
Although before the show you mentioned that you occasionally dabble in some African flavored, African...
Yeah, in law of averages, it becomes... that means I hardly drink, isn't it?
Anyway, perhaps at some future date you will share with the audience what your typical of choices on the few occasions that you do dabble. Anyway, I am very much in the West, and revisiting the Isle of Skye, one of the isles in Scotland that makes whiskey, and this one is famous for making a very peaty, smoky, and spicy whiskey. One of my favorites. The Talisker 10-year-old, it's really a pity that you guys are teetotalers and don't appreciate the rainbow of flavors and how smooth this is, but it's delightful.
It's really not a pity, but but anyway, Chris, thank you very much for having us. I think before we get into the details, let's just talk about overview what's actually happening in the world. A very significant thing that happened yesterday was Trump meeting the tech bros, the big tech companies, and in White House, and they had a dinner, and you had lots of people talking about really what is fundamental as far as AI is concerned and as far as technology is concerned. And the White House now is pro-crypto, which I think is fantastic. And you could see that the American companies are investing. And the reason why they did this is because they think that the administration is pro-business. But the other fundamental thing is we all know that was really a show. Which is perfectly fine. It's for the cameras, but it then allows us to know that the big business is actually interacting with the president. So my question to you is, do we have something similar happening in Zimbabwe? Do you guys ever interact with the presidium? And what's the closed sessions, or why is it they are never open sessions?
Yeah, quite a very significant question. I mean, look, Trump meeting the tech giants, quite a very revealing meeting, I guess. And I jokingly then said, with the absence of Elon Musk, it meant the equation was quite very unbalanced. Obviously, one will say send a representative. But if it's for optics, I think you agree. Optics means the relevant people have to be in the room to send a message, regardless of their differences. So
Elon cannot be in the same room as Sam Altman. So
you can't be in the same room. But I think one positive from Trump government, if you look at the CHIP Act and his predecessor, you try to put export controls on NVIDIA. NVIDIA, if you look at market cap for NVIDIA today, you're looking at north of $4 trillion. They know the threat is China, and Trump can't afford to sleep or to rest on his laurels. He knows the AI competition between Washington and Beijing, it can only take such dinners like we saw yesterday to be frequent. So it's expected. Then I think coming back home, look, we engage. I think what might differ is the color, quality, and nature of the engagement itself. But engagements have been quite very much frequent in between. Some of them obviously coming as all business member organizations, and some of them obviously coming as particular business member organizations. For example, I can refer to the June engagement with the Vice President of the country, who is also responsible for the cluster on business. That's Vice President Chiwenga.
So this was at the ZNCC?
This was at the Chamber of Commerce Congress, which is the biggest event for the members. And chief amongst issues, obviously, we spoke about even in the open room, I think the issue of reserved sectors, the strong feeling that the Zimbabwean business, there are sectors where we need protection. I know for most free market enthusiasts, it will not make sense. But
it doesn't.
It will not, but I obviously will deliberate on that, because from transatlantic zone to Asia to every part of the world, I think, economies are becoming conscious of areas where they need to be protected. Even ACFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, I think, they talk of sensitive products which will not need any competition. But that we can deliberate later.
Yeah, we can get into the details later on. But overview, what we just want to understand is there engagement?
Absolutely.
And what's the nature of those engagements?
Very
is it just platitudes, or these are real issues that you're raising?
No.
And what's the response from the other side?
It's real issues. I think obviously, when the economy at times moves southwards, the question then will be, is our private sector doing enough in terms of the level of engagement which pushes the politicians? But I think you appreciate, maybe before you go further, that we are dealing with a 76% informal economy. So your voice at one point can either be sunk or be heard to reverse that informality. But the level of engagement has been quite very, I think I can say with all genuine mutual respect between the parties. We don't agree all the time. If you were to ask, obviously, we'll list a number of issues as private sector coming from the Chamber of Commerce, where our position is so much off tangent with the government of the day regarding economic management, which I believe we'll go into. But look, the message to viewers and listeners is we engage, we agree, and we also differ. And to us, we think it's enormous to go through such a path.
Okay. What are your thoughts on the engagement, on the Trump engagement, but also even in China? We've seen a great level of engagement between the politicians and business. Do you think that there's enough of that from Zimbabwe, and from what you've just heard from Chris?
Look, I don't think anybody will make the case that we're doing enough, or that it's even possible to be doing enough. But what I can say from what I've observed over the last several years, certainly there's been a step change in the level of engagement between the government and the private sector since November 2017. I think there's a lot more engagement. Certainly from where we're sitting as Friday Drinks, we were there at the ZNCC annual conference earlier this year. We did engage a few senior government officials. A few of them actually came onto the show, and we had what I think were constructive conversations. We've had several conversations with senior government officials on the show. I think that they are much more amenable in this current dispensation to hear the voice of business, to engage. Obviously, I think ideologically we see the world quite differently, so this is where some of the big disagreements arise. But certainly, I think there's a lot of engagement. Where I will differ slightly with Chris is that I think the perception out there is still that there isn't enough of it, that business is docile, that a lot of business leaders are not given to speaking out when they are affected, which is why last week we were quite vocal in our approval or excitement at the level of engagement that you guys, or at the level of the level that you guys are calling out some of the policies that aren't working, to actually describe where we are today as a crisis is actually a very big step, and we applaud that level of frankness, to actually call a spade, because we haven't seen that kind of honest conversation coming from the private sector,
Okay, great. So let's actually get into the weeds of all this. And we're going to use a fantastic article that another friend of the show wrote for The Independent. And that's from Gloria Ndoro Kombachoto. And she wrote, "Killing the Goose That Lays the Greenback." And, she picked up on some of the items that were already raised and some of the issues that business have raised. And she's getting into the details on these are the issues that we need to address. And so far, government has not addressed them. And I was just saying that before the show started, that I saw an electricity bill for one of the big manufacturers, or one of the big guys in big businesses in Zimbabwe. And it turns out that diesel or fuel has now become more expensive, and they use more diesel and more fuel than they do ZESA. This just to tell you the fundamental problems that we have with ZESA. And this has been going on now for the greater part of the decade. We continuously say we're going to solve it, but we haven't. So these are real issues. So let's start there. Are you guys actually raising these issues, and what's the responsible government, and what do you think?
Yeah, I'll certainly share, I think, numbers, and also try maybe to delve into, firstly, the power issue. You raised a very interesting question, which is critical. Because when you have to talk of industrialization, you can't talk of it while it's in darkness. And I want to believe.
Yeah, you can't talk of AI if you don't have
AI actually, I'll even share numbers of how data centers on average are eclipsing major economies like Spain, France. If you look at if data centers were if we're going to do just metrics of how much data centers are eating in terms of power, you see big economies are eclipsed in terms of terawatt hours of energy.
Consumption, yeah.
So, but let me come back to Zimbabwe. When we engage, firstly, I think at one point we had our challenges with the power utility, which is what is known as ZESA, obviously. At one point when we looked at the budget, seeing that sometimes almost 60% of the budget will go towards administrative costs as opposed to the maintenance. It can then tell you a structure.
So this is ZESA, the parastatal?
The parastatal itself.
Okay, so 60% of their cost is administration?
Being dedicated to administration. Possibly, it's a moving number. That was 3-4 years ago when we engaged them.
Okay.
These numbers don't come easily, obviously, as you know. That can tell you a story of how difficult it is to fix this anathema we are calling power challenge. Going back to the generators, today as I'm talking to you, we are talking of generating around 1,700 megawatts. And the government's push is to reach 2,000 megawatts, if you listen to the government's position on power, obviously, which is a pittance if you are to industrialize. But because we have a depressed economy, the number looks good. Zimbabwe, in terms of power cost today, we're talking of about 16.08 cents per kilowatt hour. Maybe let me give you a picture of some economies. When you talk of India, we are talking of, it can look so funny. We're talking of 7 cents. China, you're talking of almost similar 7 cents. Then you talk of South Africa, which is slightly above Zimbabwe, around 17 cents.
Yeah,
that is
they also have problems.
Also competing with USA, almost around 17 cents per kilowatt hour. You look at Europe, Germany is a different case, obviously. You're talking of 30 cents. But it's taxes. It's a lot of factors which you then have to factor in given the tax environment of these major economies. Our generators, our power generation, the debt position, sadly, the power utility. We are talking of failure to pay timelessly the Chinese for 1G788. The debt which had been a headache.
I thought it was ring-fenced with, did they call it Exco?
No, it's a debt which has to be honored. I think that's the bigger picture we need to have on that.
Okay.
That's stage 3 of power plants in Zimbabwe. Then stage 2 consists of 2 plants, that is 1G 5 and 6. And they have capacity to generate 440 megawatts, which is 220 each. But one of the plants is dysfunctional, totally dead. It can be repaired, but obviously funds is an issue. They are not supported through budget. And the stage 1, obviously, we're talking of these generators which were built in 1981-82 for 1 and 4. Installed capacity 120 megawatts, but they're generating below 80. that can tell you the structural challenges before we go to the hydro side. So when we engage the government, our issue will not be, can I call it an ephemeral lobbying, where you look at what is there today to say, fix it now. But there's a structural challenge. Don't mention even the debt position. At one point, we picked that about $500 million will be needed to overhaul the whole power matrix within the country to act as a normal economy when it comes to power supply. And power utility has not been getting budgetary support from the Treasury. I think you don't see a ZESA item line within the budget. That alone can then tell you that when we lobby for power issues, sustainable models of investing in energy is what is lacking at the moment, and that will not be solved by mere lobbying in conference rooms.
Does government actually accept that we do have an energy crisis?
I think they do. There's a difference between accepting. Obviously, I think everyone wants to be.
Do they even acknowledge that we have an energy crisis?
No, they do. They do. If you follow the government position through official communication, I doubt every time we talk to government, every time they even post on their social media handles. One of the senior officials I heard, he was quite very much in celebratory mood today when there was a significant jump, especially on Kariba to around 700 megawatts from around 600, which is quite significant. But the challenge is sustainability. It's not sustainable.
And it's rather erratic. I mean, Kariba is rather erratic.
Is there, but it's not enough to acknowledge.
But if we acknowledge that we have an energy crisis, then the natural conclusion would be allow private sector to find its own solutions and reduce the regulations whatsoever. I mean, if somebody wants to start a power plant, the amount of regulation and the cost of regulation, it doesn't reflect that we are in a crisis mode. And
So,
if you saw what happened with America, for example, because AI, the race as far as AI is concerned, and you see what's happening with China, China has gone and has gone further to ensure that there is investment in AI. And America has gone further to reduce all the regulations around AI, just so that they get the investment, because they do recognize that there is a crisis there. So why is it when we've recognized that there is a crisis, but we haven't reacted? We haven't showed that, oh, okay, guys, you know what, there are all these challenges. We do have a crisis, but if you guys can make a plan, please go ahead, make a plan, and we're going to make it easy for you to make a plan.
Yeah, I just to double click on what Tinashe is saying, I think we've actually, in the universe of energy, as Zimbabwe, we've actually run this experiment before. If you think about the last 25 years, we used to have this creature called Noxim that had a complete monopoly on the importation and distribution of fuel in the country, and you had price controls of fuel, and it was always in local currency, at a discount to, the free market rate. And we had an ongoing crisis in fuel for decades, where there were just these unbelievable fuel queues, shortages, just headaches. Until somewhere along the line, to their credit, the government decided that, fuel needs to be priced in US dollars. And, because we don't make any of it here. And even though we've got the ZIG, and before the ZIG, we reintroduced the local currency, that sector, if they want to sell exclusively in dollars, that's okay. And you know what? We haven't had a fuel crisis or fuel challenges or shortages since we pivoted, and we just and electricity is just another form of energy. Yes, we do generate a whole bunch of it here, but if we are not paying fair value for it, we're always going to have challenges. So what do you think the difference is in because the government certainly wisely pivoted when it came to fuel? Why haven't we seen a similar pivot in this other form of energy called electricity?
Let's put context to this whole electricity issue. Remember, I gave you a number of 16.08 cents per kilowatt hour.
Yes.
By any stretch of imagination, it's high. In sub-Saharan Africa, actually, it's top 5 Zimbabwe.
No, Zimbabwe it's actually telling us it needs to be higher.
No, but officially we're talking of 16.08 cents. That's the official tariff. Top 5 in sub-Saharan Africa. Obviously, that can tell you a story. And this 16.08 for working capital, it has to fund working capital for the utility. it also is to fund infrastructure project, the capital expenditure we are talking about. So surely, then you look at the whole inefficiencies in transmission. They are talking of not less than 30% loss through transmission. This is the ZETDC side. Going back to when there was unbundling of the power utility, I think you know the ZEN, the ZEN.
So we've reversed the unbundling. We're now in a process of rebundling.
But I'm trying to give you a picture of the vision which was there. You know ZEN, most people don't actually know, ZEN being one of the units, subsidiaries within this group. The duty of ZEN was to manufacture transformers in all the requirements. You know, normally when a transformer is vandalized in your hood, it takes a month of Sundays for power to come back.
Yes.
But the issue was ZEN's role is to manufacture such. ZETDC, power lines, 70 years old plus. So the inefficiencies, they can tell you a story of also how we slept on the wheels regarding roads, regarding the water situation. So when I talk about this, I wouldn't want to limit the whole argument to power. Otherwise, I will lose the plot of the issues we are trying to solve on this. So I think,
so we're saying, yes, we've recognized that government has a problem.
Challenge.
Why can't private sector get on with it? Because now the hurdle is, okay, this is a problem. But if I want to set up my own power plant, the regulations and the cost of regulations just are prohibitive, and making it impossible. And yet there is a national crisis on electricity. So you guys can't provide the electricity, you can't provide the water.
Open up the industry.
Just open up the industry and say, you know what, we do have a crisis. Like we're saying about China and America, what they did as far as AI is concerned. It's, okay, this is what we want. We want major investments. What is the problem? The problem are the hurdles and the regulations. Okay, remove those and then just allow the investment to happen. Why do we still have regulation? Why is regulation still expensive when we do have an energy crisis?
I think the hurdles, they go beyond the regulations. The regulations, I think we'll speak into them obviously, but also the currents mix. If you look at the currents obtaining to be paid in ZIG for anyone who wants to get into such a capital intensive project can be difficult. And if you talk to ZERA, which is the Energy Regulatory Authority, I think their position has been clear that all currencies of trade, both the ZIG and the US dollar, are the currencies you can be paid if you're an investor, including in the energy sector.
But if you're ZERA, why do you care? We have a crisis, we can't produce enough electricity. And some guy decides he's going to come up with his own plant and he wants to sell it in US dollars. Why do you care if you're ZERA?
It's the regulatory burden.
But why do you care? Because we are in a crisis. So why do you care whether it's charged in US dollars or in Zim dollars? We've seen it in fuel.
It's a difficult question, but look, it's the currents, one. Two, the regulatory burden, possibly to them, it's a strategic industry, I want to believe. Because IPPs, independent power producers, have been approved. Today, as I'm talking to you, I think we are looking at generation of around 53 megawatts. In total, which is a pittance, obviously, given the number of people who wants to join the industry. But I think joining long-term investment, firstly, that capital, I'm not sure how many people are willing to invest in your capital outlay for you to recoup that amount in a market where 2030 comes, possibly the currents shift or push you to the edges. So it's a host of factors. You can't limit it just maybe to what we call the regulatory requirements which are put by ZERA.
Okay, all right. Let's move on because we've got a number of things that we want to talk about. And like I said, I'm just using the issues that Gloria has raised. So the big one has to do with tax and the high taxation environment that we're in. We saw 2% IMTT being introduced, and that is huge. VAT is again one of the highest in the world. We've got numerous taxes. So operating for a formal business in Zimbabwe has become quite problematic purely because of the tax system and the tax regime. And you, as a representative of business, how far have you gone to ensure that government actually reduces tax? I can't remember the last time that we actually reduced tax. And yet the first world, so in China, do you know what the corporate tax is in China? It's actually 15%. In America, they've reduced the tax, right? In Zimbabwe, it's 25% corporate tax. And yet we want investment in Zimbabwe.
Yeah, the issue of tax, maybe you can link it with what we call the fiscal psychology. Fiscal psychology, which is the reason why you talk about the informal sector, which is almost 76%. It tells you in public finance, when we say those who are residents are voting with their feet away from honoring obligations, it's a sign of that. But on tax, maybe let me take you to issues we are already lobbying. As I'm talking to you right now, Chamber of Commerce, part of the leadership at the ZIMRA, meeting the whole leadership of the Revenue Authority. The biggest challenge we have with the Revenue Authority, let me be clear on this, obviously, I think it's good for them more than for us when we talk about it. ZIMRA is an agency. Every time you engage them, their issue is we're implementing what has been pushed by Treasury, which is said, because if you look at the ZIMRA Act, it clearly states that the agent is an advisor, just like a central bank. It's an agent, but it's an advisor to the Treasury. The pressure which the Treasury boss, Mutuli, always had in balancing the books, knowing fully well that there is chaos, they are living on a fiscal cliff edge, it made it difficult. Let me start with IMT. IMT, if you were to ask me our position on IMT, it's quite clear. If you look at the ripple effects IMT is having in this economy, creating financial disintermediation, because even banking money is not attractive with IMT we are having. We don't believe IMT is serving any purpose. If ever it was serving purpose, it was a revenue-raising measure. But in a normal economy, I think you know, taxes are just not put to raise revenue. Go back to a year ago when William Ruto pushed the finance bill to raise about 2.7 billion equivalent US dollars, 2.7 billion. We spoke about the mandamanos, the strikes. He had to suspend the finance bill because the whole nation had said, no, we can't afford the whole housing levy, which Ruto was pushing or foisting upon the Kenyans. It was an issue. Coming back to Zimbabwe, I think our biggest challenge, the failure or lack of knowledge possibly on the Public Finance Management Act by the parliamentarians. It can also reflect on the caliber of parliamentarians we have. Because for a whole finance bill to be approved when you are representing the ordinary citizens, and you know the impact IMT is having on someone in the street, it shows a legislature which to a certain extent had been not robust enough before you worry about even business. We need to understand.
I think that's a fair enough comment.
We move also to...
The parliamentarians have let us down.
Let's talk about also the monocurrency, the 2030 or even earlier.
Okay, yeah, we can get into that. That's another.
No, I'm trying to push the tax subject on the current.
Okay.
If you look at the laws of Zimbabwe, we've got the VAT Act, I think Section 384, and also the Finance Act, Section 4A. Their position is you can only honor your taxation in the currency of trade or declaration. To us, it's already a sign that there is no confidence in the local unit. Surely, if I buy something using US dollar and I'm willing to pay my tax in Zim dollar, what should be the difference if the exchange rate is correctly priced? That's an issue. So today, if you look at private sector members, one of the very most tax heads, which is having a big challenge or creating complications, is the VAT. VAT, as you know, it's input on tax, it's input on purchase versus the output. It's an input-output tax. ZIMRA's position today is saying we don't recognize two currencies. If you are to trade in US dollar, even the other leg of the transaction, you have to pay your tax in
US dollars.
So even if you are to have refunds in ZIG, the ZIMRA position is we have to audit you first to know that we owe you. So you can see how tough the whole environment in terms of taxation. We'd always been lobbying as private sector.
Well, you know, Delta has been slapped with 74 million, and primarily because of this, the use of two
currencies alone. If people were to understand the impact of running two currencies and the tax implications, I think we'd be shocked. But the signal being set through central government and ZIMRA in this particular case, of arguing that a piece of legislation, a provision being said that the currency you are using to trade is the currency you are going to pay tax in, I think it's a vote of no confidence in the local unit, which is quite sad. And as business, we continue pushing, hoping that one day.
So let's Rufaro, because I tend to actually agree with what Chris is saying, because you're the owner of the currency. You should really, it doesn't matter whether someone is paying tax in Zim dollar or in ZIG. Why should you care? But we've seen with Delta as an example that they do care. And the reason why they care is because they destroyed the Zim dollar. Because if the Zim dollar, if they had been protecting the Zim dollar, then they wouldn't care. They'll be ambivalent on whether or not you pay your taxes in US dollars or in Zim dollars. But because there was a problem, and the problem is not coming from anywhere else but government itself, central bank and treasury itself, they're the ones who destroyed their local currency. And now it becomes an issue on whether or not you should pay in US dollars or you should pay in ZiG.
And there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in principle, the idea of a monocurrency, there's no problem. The challenge that I have when I apply my mind to it is just the fact that right now when we have a multi-currency regime, it's not fungible, right? We talk about a willing buyer, willing seller market, but it's not.
But this is not about fungibility. This is government itself.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is the point is the
government should accept both currencies because they have accepted that the instruments that we have and the monetary system that we have is we have two currencies. And if I'm paying my taxes,
and there's a ruling exchange rate.
There's a ruling exchange rate. Why should they care?
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, my point is
about fungibility. I don't want to change, but I purely want to give you back. I want to pay something.
I agree with you, but what I'm saying is the reason why I bring up fungibility is, even if they want to have that distinction that if you earn in US dollars, pay in US dollars, if you earn in ZiG, pay in ZiG. We wouldn't care in the private sector if the two are fungible, right? So if you woke up on the day that you needed to pay your tax obligation, and it turned out that for operational reasons you're sitting on much more ZiG than you owe in US dollars, you just go to your bank and say, hey, you know what? I need to pay so much in US dollars. And because it's completely fungible, there's no hana, you don't have to jump through any hoops. They just pay the US dollar equivalent, right? Because the two are just completely fungible,
it's just
right?
fungible. It's a fair price. Yeah.
But if they're not fungible, then your point becomes valid to say, so why are you insisting on US dollars?
Discount
right?
on the other currency.
And why do you call this market a willing buyer, willing seller market? And I think if I was to distill like the macroeconomic issues, to just one, that would be a game changer in terms of, allowing the formal sector to be competitive and, Zimbabwe to be attractive to foreign investment. It's this currency thing, it's this,
Okay, so let's zero in because I still differ because I'm looking at it as from a perspective of fungibilities about the market. But if I'm sitting here and I created this currency as government, it doesn't matter what it is. And I give you an exchange rate as central bank. If you want to pay your taxes, I shouldn't care.
It should be indifferent. I agree with you.
I shouldn't care
exactly the case.
whether you're paying in Zim dollars or you're paying in US dollars.
Exactly.
I shouldn't care. And I shouldn't insist that you were trading in US dollars, so you need to pay in US dollars. The reason why they're doing so is because they don't have confidence in their own currency.
No, it's a reflection.
And then now they're punishing a company because Delta has been punished. And yet, they were the ones who had Zim dollars. Because if they had propped up their Zim dollar, if they had done what was necessary as far as the Zim dollar is concerned, they wouldn't care whether Delta was paying in Zim dollars or was paying in US dollars. Yeah. Are we being unreasonable? Are we being unreasonable? Chris, you are the representative, the business representative.
I think, like I rightly pointed, it's quite difficult to win this with government, but I hope with our continuous engagement on the current issue, we will win this one. Coming back to the issue, it's an exchange rate issue, remember, because yes, it can hide behind taxation, but it's exchange rate. With engagement with the central bank, and it's also open, obviously, the Chamber of Commerce position on this, the biggest can I say fault or weakness we're having with the market we have, as you know, it's a case of government being the biggest supplier of forex. If you look through the surrender requirement, it's not a two-legged market. When it's a market, you have suppliers also coming from the private sector. But today, if you talk of a rational supply of currency, it's difficult to get a private sector member who is willing to surrender their forex at 26.27. That's the reality. So we don't need vector error correction model to determine what is an optimal exchange rate, when a lot of factors are militating against our currency. Firstly, look at the ZiG inflation versus the US dollar inflation. Look at the ZIG interest rate versus US dollar interest. All those factors, the differentials themselves can make the ZIG unattractive, which are the fundamentals. When we say correct fundamentals, those are the fundamentals you need to fix. But for now, the push is liberalize. I know liberalizing means a lot to different people. For some, it's managed exchange rate. But as the market believes that the exchange rate,
I think that's Rufaro's point.
This is the market. As the market is convinced that there is a hand in the determination of anything, you will not convince it. When you go to any one of the retail shops to look for a loaf of bread, you will never contest whether it should be $1. The market has accepted. So no amount of foisting or over-explaining will pitch an exchange rate to a certain value. And I'm not sure why we are so afraid of that. Maybe it's the optics of the 2008 legacy of too many zeros, which push us to fear whenever we see an exchange rate militating against possibly a triple digit. I want to believe it's a psychological monetary phenomenon, which is somehow manifesting itself in how we are managing the exchange rate on this.
Yeah, for some reason they think that it must be fixed. Because right now the exchange rate is like 26.
So Chris, this conversation brings up a question in my mind when we engage government as business, because sometimes, one of the challenges that we have, look, I could be wrong, but from my perspective, is this, when business is engaging government, often the perception from the government side is that we are acting in self-interest, right? We are pushing for policy action that will benefit us, that will make us more profitable. And I wonder whether we ever present to Treasury and the government the blue sky scenario, where we're saying, hey, you guys are, call it, tax revenue per annum today, circa $4 billion a year. Mm-hmm. Do you know that if we actually liberalize and we change the policy environment, you could be collecting 10 billion, right? And we would be doing so much better as business in the private sector, but the volumes, the numbers will be so much bigger, right? So it's not necessarily that we in business will make more money and life will be easier for us in a different policy environment. You sitting on the other side of the ledger as government, right? When the business community, when the private sector is thriving, right?
You benefit as well.
Instead of collecting instead of your annual revenue being 4 billion, right? You could be on 10 billion. You could be on 15 billion.
Your annual revenue, export receipts, and everything, because it's a function of a.
Not just the taxation, right? Because take any
can be a competitive advantage.
No, it does.
If whatever your VAT percentages, right? If you double the turnover, right? That is eligible for VAT, you double the VAT revenue. If you grow it 10 times, you increase your VAT revenue 10 times, right? And there are scenarios in which we take policy action that will actually achieve those outcomes.
No, we did. Look at Turkey, what you call Turkey. 6 years ago, the exchange rate Turkey, we're talking of 1:3 to the greenback. Today, we're looking somewhere around 41, 42. I don't think, in one of the celebratory moods, the mood from Turkey today, from Ankara, from any part of Turkey, is the reason why their textile industry spread to the world. Competitiveness, pushed by an exchange rate which is friendly to them. Look at the headache of Beijing today when it's fighting the whole trade war between Trump and Xi Jinping. It had always been premised on the manipulation of current so-called by the Beijing government. Every time when they run a current account deficit, north of 500 billion, that is the US government, China will look back and say, but why are you worried? You've got a capital account where we are the biggest consumers of your treasury bonds. We are funding your capital account. Yeah. It had always been the argument. But I think for us, it's a historical issue coming from a hyperinflationary zone. Not only hyperinflationary, look at the late 90s. If you were to track the exchange rate of Zimbabwe, I think you'd always seen traces of what we call a managed exchange rate. It's not a new thing. During Gideon Gono's time, we had engagement. Same, or maybe wearing a different head, but we always engaged on this.
And you're certainly wearing a different attire.
Different attire, obviously. So it is an issue. I think exchange rate is a difficult subject for the leaders, in particular ministers, maybe to face the president and tell them that in the short term this could have inflationary effects to the populace or to the voters, but the long-term impact is ABC. I'm sure if I was a minister, I would put a brave face, go face the head of state and say, look, for the next 2 years, certain inflationary pressures will be there, but that ZIG price, it has to adjust in line with inflation. But the picture which then one or two people share, they have to keep their jobs, maybe. Maybe they believe that's the correct exchange rate, maybe. But I also want to believe that...
So are you saying that the president is misinformed?
Possibly, because if the exchange rate is mispriced, then it becomes misinformed. But they've also every reason to differ. It's possible that they see it differently. Maybe they think private sector is just maybe seeing it from another world. But our position becomes clear. I think to me, what is more important is...
But Chris, why would you have a problem if government itself is now getting 50% of the surrender? So it's and there's no exchange rate as far as the 30% export surrender is concerned. So as far as government is concerned, they are getting US dollars. Mm-hmm. Why then do they have any problem whatsoever with the market-determined exchange rate?
No, that's what I mean. The short-term inflationary pressures possibly which comes with liberalizing. But what do you want to sacrifice? Short-term inflationary pressures at the expense of sustainable. When you talk of sustainability for the next 20 years, what will you choose?
All right, good point. Good point. Let's move on. We know that there's, talking about surrender, we know that exporters, well, some of them are your members, are owed about $176 million that they haven't been paid, but the US dollars were taken. So this is export surrender. We know that it's $1.2 billion that government owes the suppliers, but that was in January. I assume that this time around it's way more. We know that TBs are this year it's about 785 million TBs that are due, and 180 million last year matured and wasn't paid out. Government is simply not honoring what is due. What are your members saying? When you engage government, what's the response you're getting from government?
I think what's more significant and what we appreciate is the fiscal accounts certainly are not in good shape. I think we want to look at it from a bigger picture. We know the pressures which the central government is working on that. It's under pressure. There are certain what we call fixed costs which they can't avoid month on month, which they have to commit. And this is not limited to that, maybe as I'm trying to answer your question. Going even to insurers, or I ask myself, insurers, pension funds, I'm sure civil servants contribute pension, but where does it sit?
Well, ideally it should go to NASA and to the pension funds.
Think, okay, but let's say it
but
is.
We hear it's not going.
Then, but maybe it's a discussion for another day on that. You look at insurance companies who are also members of the chamber. If you go to the SSB, you see for the
deductions are
happening, but then when it comes to flow funds, you don't feel it.
Yeah.
So it could be a case, like I said, of living on a fiscal cliff edge, where possibly the hidden deficit we are running in, it's not easy to eclipse it. It's the reality of it.
Okay.
And
so when you say hidden deficit, are you saying that it's not in our budgets?
So it means the expenditure,
we don't see it.
It means it's not accounted for in the budget, obviously. Even if you.
So are you doubting our numbers?
Not numbers, obviously. If any proper person, when you look at numbers, you have every reason. Either it's Washington or they're coming from New Delhi or what. And these numbers, obviously, we believe we can review them because that capacity, the lack of capacity, rather, to honor the obligations, to pay the service providers, it should tell us a story. If the reason is to protect the ZIG, in particular for contractors, as we said, then obviously it then means we haven't tested the ZIG enough to know whether it can stand the test of time.
Because Professor Mtuli, when he presents his budget, he says our deficit is only 0.5%.
Yeah, but you can't thrive on a deficit talk in an informal economy. When you look at the government numbers or even the private sector numbers, we are cautious even when we do our private sector reports. Because they are dealing with, for every dollar, 76 cents is underground. You can't account for it. So
let's actually talk about that because you've raised quite a bit. I don't believe those numbers. Do you and your members believe that the Zimbabwean informal sector is 76%?
Look, the reason why we might believe it is ZNCC maybe it came as a shocker because in our last State of Industry and Commerce survey, where it put the number at around 67%. So government actually had pitched bigger numbers than what we did. So we have every reason possibly to be wowed, like, oh, is it? It's actually bigger than we thought. But people have different views, obviously. Some will say it bigger than that. But by any stretch of imagination, 76% informality.
Above 40%.
It's not
76% is the highest in the world.
Because if you look at countries like Nigeria, you look at Guinea,
those are around 50%.
Those countries are talking about 50, 40%, and it's still abnormal.
Yes.
So the level of informality we have, what it then means is you can't look at the trade numbers and be conclusive. Because what you are considering to be your import bill, possibly it's a fraction. Because no one try to price in the porosity of your borders. Because whenever there's an informal sector thriving, the probability and propensity of informality being fed through also informal means remains high. So it's quite difficult. This also maybe translate. Maybe he accepted that informal sector is real and it's bigger than anyone can imagine, which could be the reason for rebasing the GDP, which we had seen recently.
Do you believe those numbers? That the Zimbabwean economy is actually 44 billion?
I think the position, if you listen to ZimStats, I think the argument is always clear to say we adhere to the international standards whenever we report our numbers. So as citizens in the country, I think we have every reason also to believe in. But whatever, whether we believe or not, the numbers they are bringing, especially on informality, they make a sad reading. Was informality of 76%.
You're shying away from the question. Do you and your members believe that the Zimbabwean GDP is 44 billion?
Yeah, we trust what they are bringing on board. Possibly.
So you believe those numbers. Do you and your members believe in the agriculture numbers? Because we know that some of your members have raised this point. Where in the budget, the budgetary estimate was for 2.3 million metric tons, but it turns out it's less than 1 million metric tons. The reality on the ground, it's less than 1 million metric tons. The millers are complaining, everybody is complaining, and yet in the budget we were told we had a bumper harvest. So I'm asking you, as the head of the business, do you believe the government numbers, and how does that translate with your members?
No, I shouldn't doubt on veracity, on maybe how credible the numbers are. Obviously, even if a Chamber of Commerce comes up with statistics on the state of the economy, naturally not everyone will believe. So the issue of believing or not, I will not even dwell on it. But what is the picture I'm seeing? Agriculture, if you talk to an average rural farmer, they are telling you that the price of a bucket of maize, which used to be around $6, is hovering around 19. It should tell you a supply-demand issue, which could also maybe dovetail with what you are raising. Zimbabwe, you look at the consumption of maize annually for the country, we're looking at about 1.8 million.
Yeah, 2.1 million metric tons, yeah.
2.1,
including stock feed as well.
Maybe, yes, but for human feed.
Yeah.
And the numbers then become an issue if 90% of Zimbabweans, one or another, produces maize. If you talk of rural farmers, it is the engine, it is the economy. So the numbers, believing them or not, I think we have every reason to believe it, unless possibly...
So are you saying you're believing that there's 2.3 million metric tons, and at the same time you're believing that what you're seeing with the rural farmer tells you that there's a shortage?
What we are seeing with the rural farmer.
So there's a shortage, but you still believe
possibly
in the
demand has gone up. It's possible.
Because there's a shortage.
So possibly,
but we still should believe the
2.3 million.
The 2.3 million metric
remember,
tons.
it's not a stock variable when we are looking at it. That's what I'm saying. In believing the numbers, the increase in prices per unit of the maize, it might not necessarily confirm. I'm saying there's a possibility that the numbers are not as honest because of those prices. But also, you have to look at it.
To be fair, to be fair to the government and its forecasts and its agencies, I mean, globally governments generally struggle producing accurate numbers. If you look at, so I think today's, the Americans are going to produce their labor numbers, unemployment, and that sort of thing. And if you look at the size of their revisions, every time they release numbers, they're quite material, right? They get these numbers horribly wrong all the time.
This is USA.
Yeah, and this is the US. This is the US Labor Department.
Difficult zone.
Right.
Okay, so you guys, so employment numbers has to do with definitions. and they are actual estimates. And these are revised on a monthly basis.
Yes.
It's just that the market likes numbers on a monthly basis. But when you get the yearly numbers, they've already been revised. So you're getting
No, I hear you. But what I'm saying is,
which is fundamentally different from what we're talking
but Tinashe,
about.
where my problem is.
What we're talking about, and it bears us really highlighting this, because it's a real issue, because it has to do with feeding the nation. And if you say
okay, but
we're going to produce.
But what are the alternative numbers? I think that's what I'm
let me be
interested
clear. Let me just be clear.
What numbers are being paid?
Let me just be clear about maize. Maize production.
So the alternative production number that we had.
This is from where?
This is the U.S. Agents.
For Zimbabwe.
For Zimbabwe, they actually. So when Ministry of Agriculture came out, they actually said 2.8 million metric tons. Treasury revised that downwards and said, "You guys."
Really revise the numbers for agriculture GDP.
They were like, no, it can't be 2.8. But they said Ministry of Treasury remained with 2.3. But I forget what the name of the agency is, but in South Africa, it sits in South Africa, had projected 1.3 million metric tons. And it turns out the reality is far less than that.
Yeah, but if you've been tracking, from a government of Zimbabwe perspective, if you've been tracking our forecasts for maize production over the last 20 years, those numbers are just not with the paper they're written on. They're just completely unreliable. So look, we've got a long, well-documented track record.
Chris is saying,
so personally, I don't believe those numbers.
But Chris is saying we believe those numbers.
Because we're given those numbers from agriculture. Unless if I have an alternative. Because when you're pitching numbers, for example, we spoke about exchange rate, isn't it? Within our in-house.
Chris is just being polite.
No. On this one, let me drive this point home.
Okay, please.
I was waiting for the alternative numbers for agriculture.
I can give you.
Cautious. The reason why I was cautious on agriculture is the Chamber of Commerce had not been quite very involved in agriculture numbers. So when he raised it, I then said, no, look. Possibly the price changes to it's upward. Confirm what he's saying, but is it sufficient to look at it that way? Maybe demand is also going up.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So look, I think
I'd love to see the alternative numbers for me to comment. I think it's difficult for me to just use heresy to
and
to give my views on that particular.
I'm generally an optimist, but when it comes to official numbers in Zim, whether it's GDP, whether it's maize production.
Numbers.
We've got a very well
official numbers become difficult.
Documented long history of getting it horribly wrong.
You know why it's difficult? This is my opinion. It doesn't represent anyone. Obviously, look at ZimStats reporting to the Treasury report. Remember, that's the reporting line. And I want to believe, it might not be a fact, but I want to believe it's possible that maybe ZimStats will sit and share the numbers with the boss before they are released. So obviously you will pick them with a bit of caution as you look at numbers. But
so Chris, I can give you the alternative number. It's actually done by USDA, the Southern African unit, and it projected the 2024-2025.
So USDA, that's the US Department of Agriculture.
Projection
yeah, okay.
That sits in the Southern African. So they actually do the entire SADC region, and they had projected 1.3 million metric tons.
How credible are they?
Well, they're actually
they're independent. I don't know how credible
they're actually the most credible, right? Because when we see the reality, they're closer to the reality than our Ministry of Agriculture, than Treasury.
That's why I'm cautious to give you a very strong view on these numbers, because for agriculture we've been a bit remote on this.
Okay.
We have to depend on credible numbers.
Okay, fair enough. But generally, should we believe the numbers that come out of
obviously,
the Ministry of Finance?
I think most of our economies, especially with a left-leaning philosophy, numbers. You can talk of China, you can talk of Indonesia. Whenever numbers are released, there is caution. Today, as I'm talking to you, I looked at development reimagined numbers for China export size within this economy. China argues that the total exports of African products into Chinese market are somewhere around $285 billion from a target 300 billion. Who targeted it? I think all of you know about FOCAC, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, where they pushed it. Then you look at Development Reimagined, quite a credible institution. When it looks at the exports which Africa has pushed into China market, we are looking at slightly above $175 billion.
So there's a little gap there.
So I'm trying to bring you closer to how numbers, it depends. That's why in economics, whenever you draw even a trend, you have to push a source, isn't it? It gives room to whoever is consuming to possibly try to pick whether it's...
But it now goes to the margin of error. So the China, Africa, you can see the margin of error. It's still
significant.
It's still significant.
Very significant.
But how about our margin of error?
175.
So
versus 285
so
billion.
how about Ministry of Agriculture telling us that it's 2.8 million metric tons, and the reality is less than 1 million metric tons?
Yeah,
so then it becomes a question of margin of error.
No, statistics, it's an interesting subject. Maybe that's why, but statistics should be scientific, obviously. But then on this forecast, you said forecast, isn't it?
Yeah,
these were forecasts.
These were forecasts, and now we're getting...
What are the real numbers?
The real numbers are now less
because
than
what you have given us are forecasts.
The real numbers are less than 1 million metric tons.
But who compare those numbers now?
No, because we know what GMB is already... We know what the millers have already consumed. We know what GMB has already taken. And it's less than 1 million as we speak.
Yeah, well, that one I wasn't sure. That's
okay, which is fair enough. Which is fair enough that if you're not sure
how to respond,
I think that's a fair enough. So let's actually move on. The other big issue has to do with the informal sector, and there's a bit of the informal sector that actually trades in Zimbabwe, which is okay because a lot of that production is still in Zimbabwe. So one could argue that people are being employed and there's consumption happening in Zimbabwe. But the big worry is about products that cross the border. So we send our people across, we jump the border, but we've got serious products that are now jumping the border, and some of these products are illegal, and some of them you can't trace where exactly they're coming from, and these are now flooding our markets. What's your constituent thinking around this, and when you bring out these issues to government, what's the feeling you're getting?
Yeah, I think the porosity of borders is a serious issue. The porosity of borders, it makes the whole discussion about revising the regulatory burden a joke. Think of it, if you had to slash the whole fees and still you're exposed to open borders. What situation are you helping? So that's why we say as Chamber of Commerce, even when the whole talk we are pushing for revision of levies, fees, streamlining them, there are two major animals which are driving the cost of business, but you can't account for them in an explicit way. Corruption. In our numbers, we actually argue to say for every dollar which is a cost of producing in Zimbabwe, all those levies and taxes are constituting about 25 to 30 cents. The other balance
is corruption.
Is dominantly corruption. So people.
So you're saying corruption is closer to 80%?
So corruption, depending on how you measure it, but corruption for every dollar.
It's the cost of business.
It's the cost of doing business. No one can release it. And this corruption does not only come through you and I sharing something. You go to the borders. Possibly what is supposed to cost you $20, even at official rate, if customs is to be charged, are you charged the right tax or custom figure for the importation of that good? Is there anyone who is benefiting from that? In our last research as Chamber of Commerce, we actually put the number in terms of how the economy is suffering. We're saying $1.5 billion worth of goods which are coming through unofficial means to compete with the local manufacturing, which is one of our very problems we are having with government.
And what's the response that you, because it's clearly a crisis.
It's a crisis. No,
yeah,
when it comes to,
what is government saying about us?
In terms of porosity of borders, I think we had engaged even the revenue authorities. At one point, they spoke about using all means, including drones, to deal with the whole problem. But our borders are so porous to the extent that if we leave it unabated at this rate, I tell you, we'll be preferring a loaf of bread from Joburg, which is back there, to have breakfast here in Zimbabwe. Because there's smooth flow of goods without anyone stopping it. So it's an issue. Corruption is an issue. So the discussion should not just be about revising the levies. Because after revising the levies, and all the fees we are talking about.
What's your policy prescription as far as corruption is concerned, and as far as if you were to advise government or something that we can all rally behind and say, guys, this is what we probably need to do to deal with corruption?
Corruption is an issue, but I think it takes a lot of strong leadership in terms of state measures. Look at Rwanda, which last time when you were in Rwanda, I think you also did a research on that. To just talk about corruption in Rwanda is as good as someone who's discussing prostitution in the streets. It's something you can't. Talk of China. If you take an Uber in China, where you are supposed to pay $9.50 and you've got $10, the taxi driver will never accept that 50 cents. They know what it means, honesty. Come back home here. There's no price for anything. Value for money, which even George Guamatanga had been pushing a treasure. Phantom companies being set to benefit from tenders. And it's business as usual. So the solution lies in being harsh, especially regarding the judicial system. I think there have not been any consequences. And unfortunately, corruption is draining the nation. You look at what is happening in terms of goods pushed out of the country. I try to avoid using the word China, but outside, Africa is running a trade deficit with China. This is a problem with whole Africa. The last time I checked the numbers, trade deficit moving from around 39 billion around 2021, just as we're moving out of COVID, to northwards of possibly 70 billion as I'm sitting today. China's nature of investment in Africa, it's rare earth minerals, it's commodities, but they are smuggling them out. And how many people are pushing? Go to Chivero today. Water levels had gone down. If you talk to business people around who depend on that, they're telling us that it's that type of community possibly who are draining water for brick making, for everything. So I think what we are losing is that kind of disciplined approach to prosecute corruption and to bring order.
Are you saying that the Chinese investors are corrupt?
Not Chinese investors are corrupt. I just give you an example of China, but I'm sure it's rampant. If laws are so relaxed, it becomes a problem across the board. Then just a fortnight ago, I think you know the minister responsible for local government. He spoke about banning the second-hand clothes, isn't it? What you call mabero. After that, there is deafening silence. No one cares. So you don't push.
But is the problem mabero?
No, before we talk about whether the problem is mabero or the legality of announcing it, but I'm saying after pushing a pronouncement, then you take a back seat. Anyone who will come into the country will act the way they want because they know there's no consequence management in how we run the economy, which is a problem.
Okay, so phantom suppliers to government. Why is government not taking a strong stance as far as that is concerned?
No, yes, government can answer it. But it should take.
But we saw a prominent businessman coming out and saying that if you're not supplying government, if you're not dealing with government, then you're not in business. What's your view on that?
Let me actually give you a set picture. In average business in Zimbabwe has been arguing for the past 1.5 to 2 years that when you're in business, the environment is so harsh that the costs of doing business, when you're running a business, you break even with your costs. Then your profit will come from tenders. So once you run business using that model, then you know government is the biggest loser. But this is a clarion call and a message to also private sector players. It's quite very sad because we are just talking about government. But it's dishonest private sector players who have been entrusted by local campaign being pushed. But because we have dishonest businesses, then they also take advantage, abuse the coffers of the state. And at the end of the day, it's unfortunate that the government will still be blamed. The same happens. Someone was looking at numbers. You look at Cyril Ramaphosa, one of the most millionaires in South Africa. You look at the number of those millionaires. There was an argument that when they pushed BEE after apartheid.
Ended in 1994, yep.
Ended 1991, but independence 1994.
Yep.
But the government of South Africa pushed to say we are going to empower our blacks. But they say of the 50 billion worth of US dollars empowered, only 700 black South Africans benefited from that.
And it's a high cost. I mean, talking about the region as well. What are your thoughts about the South African economy and where it's headed and, the region as well, Zambia? I know that you are very passionate to Zambia. What's actually happening there?
No, I'm passionate about every African country. I like that. No, but look, for South Africa, it's a GNU, as you know. No one would have dreamt that one day DA will sleep in bed with ANC. But today, if you talk about the 10-part GNU which we are having, or the 34-member cabinet of South Africa, 6 coming from DA, everyone was convinced that after garnering, not too bad votes, not too good, but 6 cabinet seats.
22%.
22. 6 cabinet seats against the ANC. Look at how they fared, 40%. But they negotiated well. The interesting part about South Africa right now is DA, no matter how South Africa messes up, they're more comfortable with the ANC, because they know Mkondo Wesizwe, EFF, you can't trust Patriotic Alliance, Action South Africa, all these parties, they can't rely on them to protect their capital. So, but looking at the xenophobic trades, what is happening as I'm talking to you now, what is happening in public hospitals, I think it's a sad reading for South Africans, because you will never go to Netcare where possibly Indians, whites are treated, and you see them questioning their nationality. It's just happening upon blacks, which is sad, I think.
But I think these are public hospitals. So the idea is these foreigners are coming. These are illegal foreigners that are coming in, and they're flooding.
I don't want to believe it's about public, because how different races are interfacing in South Africa. We never had South African blacks having a challenge with any foreigner at any level, even running a restaurant or a low-value business. And that is quite sad. I think if you look at such a trend, it shows you how as blacks we have stood low to hate our skin color. That, to me, that's what it means.
Okay.
But for the GNU, I don't think it will collapse, not anytime soon. The elections.
Do you think it has been successful?
It depends. Mixed feelings, obviously, but for everyone who look at a left-leaning party like EFF, like Mkondo Wesizwe, as long as you shut them out of power, I think that's the best success for them.
It's a better alternative.
But
okay.
And what Cyril had done also, which I never thought he was going to do, pushing for the Bella Act. I think if he had been following a basic education league amendment, where they are trying to make sure.
Oh, you support that?
No, I don't. Well,
let me.
I want to ask you actually. I want to segue a little bit. Just maybe not you personally as the president of ZNCC, but the ZNCC, and you've got some sense for where your members are philosophically in terms of what they think is the best way to organize society. So obviously, because they're businesses, they believe in capitalism. But to what extent are they free market capitalists? Are they on the libertarian side of the equation? Do they believe in small government, little to regulation? Where are we philosophically? And because we never, that's a conversation that we don't often hear.
No, that's true. No, but you then become dishonest if you then have to rely on tenders from government and you try to define yourself as a capitalism. So we are cautious with the kind of business.
Well, as long as you're not corrupt, there's nothing wrong with dealing with government as long as you're not corrupt.
But remember, we spoke about because for you to be desperate for a tender, normally you have to bend rules. If you're desperate, you want it at every cost, isn't it? And at all costs, surely a tender is not a scientific way of awarding something where you wake up and say. So, Rufaro, look, I personally, maybe because I don't come from that background of philosophy, I never looked at business people. Even America, look at USA. Everyone thought it was a free market economy. He came, it's make America great.
It was libertarian until 1913, and then it started changing.
Can you compare the philosophy prior Biden and Trump? It's a world of difference. What is happening in Capitol Hill today? Who would have guessed it in our modern times? It's not happening. For China, you can't own even a tax shop. China maybe will agree that controlled economy is a different one. To the extent that I looked at the numbers for China from 2021, if you had seen the significant decline in number of registrations of companies in China,
it's massive.
But look at their contribution to manufacturing to the world. It can only tell you one story, how the state is driving everything. So in this competitive world, for you to...
Maybe you should put it out as a questionnaire to your members. So less what they do, but more about what they actually believe. Could you do that?
No,
do a survey.
No, it'll be good.
And then find out.
It'll be interesting to hear.
Just hear what the members actually think. It might be useful. Anyway, Chris, this has been fun.
Thank you so much for doing this. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, at least we got some idea of your engagement with government, and we certainly support some of your views, except the basic education, and free
the Bella
healthcare.
Act, the Expropriation Act. No, laws are...
Atiko Ikoko.
Law is like a knife. You choose whether to cut bread which will help you to cut blood or to kill yourself. So, for a country with a Gini coefficient as high as what you see in USA,
Why do you have a problem with that?
yeah, I mean, look, if you're a leader and a politician and you're Cyril Ramaphosa, you will only be foolish.
Okay, so you know how the
As
Gini
a
coefficient...
capitalist JSE,
Okay, do you know how a Gini coefficient is done? What's the Gini coefficient of somebody who's unemployed and somebody who's a waiter?
no, but look,
It's a Gini coefficient between 0 and 1.
Yes.
No, I appreciate. No, those are the shortcomings, but the inequality still, at the end of the day, is quite very loud.
But why do you
why
have a
would-
problem
why would
with
you care?
inequality? Why do you care?
No, as a
Do
politician.
you think we can all run as fast as Usain
You're
Bolt?
not a politician.
No, but I'm talking about why Bella was important for Cyril Ramaphosa.
Yeah, but not as
I mean, look,
Okay, all right. No, fair enough. But not as business. We shouldn't care. Thank you very much, Chris.
Pleasure, Thank you
We
so
need
much.
to see more of you.
Yeah, cheers.
It's always
Thank you so much for
very
coming.
interesting. It's always
Cheers
very
for a Tito
interesting.
Tala. Yeah, we say cheers. Eh?
Cheers, cheers, cheers,
If
cheers.
I'd said that, I don't take the tears of Queen. Eh?
Everybody watching, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found this as exciting and insightful as we did. Have yourself a wonderful evening and a great weekend. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Goodbye.